No fanfare, no final address, just silence. Behind the towering walls of the Vatican, the most powerful seat in global religion has just gone quiet. The man known to billions as the Pope is gone. But while the world mourns, something extraordinary is already in motion. Ancient keys are turned, seals are broken, hidden rooms within the Vatican are unlocked, and a 2,000-year-old ritual begins, one cloaked in secrecy, drama, and sacred tradition. From the destruction of the Pope's personal seal to a global search for his successor, what happens next is unlike anything else on Earth, and yet most people have no idea how deep this rabbit hole really goes, because this isn't just about mourning a religious leader. It's about power, politics, and a silent war for influence that plays out behind locked doors, while the world watches, completely unaware. So what really happens after the Pope dies? The truth starts here. The moment the Pope takes his final breath, a strange and sacred protocol is set into motion. But it doesn't begin with headlines or a public announcement. It starts in silence, behind closed doors, with a single man. This man is called the Camerlengo. The Camerlengo is known formally as the Chamberlain of the Holy Roman Church. He is more than just a figurehead. In these first moments, he becomes the only person with the authority to confirm the Pope's death. And the responsibility is unlike any other on earth. Clad in crimson robes, he approaches the Pope's lifeless body and does something that, to outsiders, might seem almost medieval. He leans in and calls out the Pope's baptismal name, not once, but 3 times. There's no answer, of course, just the finality of silence. Then, in a gesture that is more tradition than test, he gently taps the Pope's forehead with a small silver hammer. Not to wake him, but to symbolize the Church's final call, a ritual echoing centuries of history. But perhaps the most dramatic symbol comes next. The Camerlengo removes the Pope's ring of the fisherman, a solid gold signet that served as both a personal seal and a sacred mark of papal authority. Before anyone can misuse it, he takes a ceremonial hammer and destroys it. The breaking of the ring is not just a security measure. It is the public death of the Pope's power. No more documents can be signed in his name. No more commands can be issued from the throne of Peter. In that single act, the earthly authority of the Pope is officially gone. But this is only the beginning. With the Pope's death confirmed and his ring shattered, the Vatican enters a rare and solemn phase, a moment unlike any other in the Catholic world. It's called sede vacante, Latin for the seat is vacant, and make no mistake, this is no ordinary vacancy. The throne of St. Peter now sits empty. For the first time since the last papal election, the most powerful spiritual seat in the world has no leader, no pope, no voice. Just a haunting stillness that stretches from the marble floors of the Apostolic Palace to every corner of Catholicism. But someone has to keep the Church running, at least in a limited way. That duty falls once again to the Camerlengo, who now becomes the Vatican's temporary steward. He doesn't rule. He doesn't lead. His role is strictly administrative, managing the day-to-day affairs of the Holy See, but forbidden from making any decisions that would bind the future Pope. Even the heads of major Vatican departments, men who once reported directly to the Pope, must now resign, or more accurately, step aside. They retain their titles, but lose their authority until the new Pope confirms or replaces them. The Pope's private apartments are sealed, not out of superstition, but to preserve their contents until the next pontiff takes office. The Swiss Guard stands silently at the doors, no longer protecting a man, but guarding a legacy. Behind the scenes, preparations begin. The Church must grieve, the cardinals must gather, and the world must wait as the Vatican turns the page on one era and braces for the next. Because while the throne remains empty, Eyes are already turning to who will fill it. As the church enters mourning, the world begins to slow. But inside the Vatican, the rituals only intensify. These are the Novum Dies, Latin for 9 days. A solemn sacred stretch of time that blends grief with tradition and ceremony with preparation. It begins almost immediately. Each day, a Requiem Mass is held in St. Peter's Basilica, the largest and most sacred church in the world, drawing mourners from every corner of the globe. World leaders arrive in silence. Bishops and cardinals file in under towering marble columns, and the faithful gather in the square, watching, praying, waiting. The funeral itself is held between the 4th and 6th day after the Pope's death. But this is no ordinary funeral. It's a rite steeped in centuries of sacred meaning. The Pope's body is dressed in crimson vestments, placed in a simple coffin made of cypress wood, and carried through the heart of the Vatican as tens of thousands look on in silence. But there's more than one coffin. Tradition demands 3. Cypress, representing humility. Lead, representing his temporal power and protection. Elm or oak, the final shell, signifying his return to the earth. Before he is laid to rest, something curious happens. A small bag of coins, minted during his papacy, is placed beside his body, a symbol of the era he led. A document detailing his life, known as the Rogito, is sealed in the casket, and a white silk veil is gently placed over his face, a final gesture of dignity, veiling him from the world he once led. Then, the casket is lowered into the crypt. Beneath St. Peter's Basilica, among the tombs of popes long gone, leaders whose voices once carried through the same halls. But mourning isn't just a pause, it's a countdown. Because with each passing day, the Church edges closer to one of its most secretive, suspenseful, and consequential rituals: the choosing of a new pope, and the tension is just beginning to build. 9 days have passed. The Pope has been laid to rest. The world waits in reverent silence. But within the Vatican, something ancient is unfolding. Something that has remained virtually unchanged for centuries. The conclave is about to begin. It's a word that sounds simple, but its meaning? Anything but. Conclave comes from the Latin cum clave, meaning with a key. And that's exactly how it begins. The doors close, the locks turn, and more than 100 cardinals are sealed inside the Sistine Chapel, not just symbolically, but physically. From this point on, the outside world is cut off completely. No phones, no news, no messages, not even sunlight filters through the draped windows. This is the most secretive election in the world, and it happens under the watchful eyes of Michelangelo's Last Judgment, a painting that looms above the cardinals as a silent reminder of divine accountability. But here's where it gets even stranger. The cardinals don't sleep in the chapel. Instead, they're escorted to a nearby Vatican guest house, the Domus Sanctae Marthae. There, they draw random room assignments, ensuring no one receives special treatment. The living conditions are modest, but the stakes, monumental. Each day, the cardinals return to the chapel for up to 4 rounds of voting. And here's the twist. They don't campaign. They don't pitch themselves. In fact, it's considered deeply inappropriate for any cardinal to even hint at wanting the role. Instead, names circulate in whispered conversations. Alliances form quietly, and influence moves like smoke. Invisible, but undeniable. At any moment, history could shift, but only when one man reaches a 2/3 majority, and only when he accepts, will the world finally see white smoke rise above the Vatican. Until then, every prayer, every ballot, and every whispered conversation carries the weight of destiny, and what comes next is even more mysterious. It's the most secretive election on Earth. No cameras, no speeches, no promises, just silence, parchment, and smoke. Inside the Sistine Chapel, surrounded by frescoes of heaven and hell, over 100 cardinals sit in deep reflection. Each one holds a name in his mind and history in his hands. And here's the twist that most people don't know. The favorite going in almost never wins. This is how it works. Each cardinal is given a slip of paper, carefully prepared and stamped with a phrase at the top. Eligo in summum pontificum, Latin for I elect as supreme pontiff. One by one, in a slow and solemn procession, they walk to the altar. There's no fanfare, no applause, only quiet reverence. Each cardinal places his folded ballot into a ceremonial chalice covered by a paten, a shallow plate used in the Mass. He then bows and returns to his seat. Once all the votes are cast, 3 scrutineers, cardinals, chosen by lot, open each ballot, read the name aloud, and carefully tally the results. As the names are whispered one by one, the chapel becomes a vault of sacred tension. And then comes the fire. After each round of voting, the ballots are pierced with a needle, strung together with thread, and burned in a specially designed stove inside the chapel. But here's where tradition becomes signal. If no pope has been chosen, chemicals are added to produce thick black smoke rising above the chapel to tell the world, not yet. But if a pope has been elected, if 2/3 of the cardinals agree, then white smoke appears. A signal so iconic, so ancient, that crowds in the square erupt at the first glimpse. Still, it's not over yet, because the man they've chosen must still say one word: accepto. I accept. And if he does, and only then, he chooses a new name, one that marks the beginning of a new papacy. But what happens after that? That's when things take an even stranger turn. He's just been elected to lead over 1.3 billion souls. But before the cameras roll, before the balcony erupts, the new pope disappears into a small, silent room tucked away beside the Sistine Chapel. They call it the Room of Tears. No one ever forgets what happens inside. This is the moment no one can prepare for. After accepting the role with a whispered accepto, the chosen cardinal is led to this private chamber, alone, while the rest of the world waits in breathless suspense. The room is bare, quiet, and almost unremarkable, except for one detail. Inside are 3 white cassocks of different sizes, small, medium, and large, because no one knows who will be chosen ahead of time. Everything must be ready for anyone, young or old, tall or frail, reformer or conservative. The moment belongs to the unknown. But the name? That's up to him. Here the new pope selects his papal name, a decision loaded with symbolism and legacy. Some choose names of peace, like John or Francis. Others invoke strength, like Pius or Leo. But behind every choice is a signal, a message to the world about what kind of leader he intends to be. And yet the name isn't the heaviest thing in that room. That title, Pontifex Maximus, the bridge between heaven and earth, comes with a weight that crushes even the strongest shoulders. That's why this room has its name. Some popes have wept in this room. Others have sat in stunned silence. One even tried to refuse the office entirely before being persuaded to reconsider, because the tears that fall here are not just from joy or fear. They're from a man who seconds ago was a cardinal like the rest and is now suddenly the spiritual leader of over 1 billion people, the head of a global institution, and the bearer of a divine legacy. And once he steps out, there's no turning back. So what happens when he finally walks through that door? The world is about to find out. The smoke turns white. The crowd erupts. But inside the Vatican, the moment is still, frozen. For nearly an hour, the name of the new pope remains a tightly guarded secret, known only to the cardinals and a few trusted aides. Outside, tens of thousands wait in St. Peter's Square, packed shoulder to shoulder, eyes locked on one small window above the central balcony. And then, the doors open. A man in white steps forward. But it's not the Pope. It's the Senior Cardinal Deacon, and in his hands is a centuries-old script. He steps to the edge of the balcony and speaks in bold, echoing Latin, Annuntio vobis gaudium, magnum, habemus papam. I announce to you a great joy. We have a Pope. The crowd roars. But there's still more. The name is revealed, both the cardinal's birth name and the new papal name he's chosen. One word, one name, and suddenly, the tone of an entire papacy is set. And then, finally, he appears. It's a surreal sight. A man who, only hours earlier, was largely unknown outside the College of Cardinals, now stands as the most visible religious leader in the world. And yet, as the cameras zoom in, you can almost see it in his eyes, the realization, the weight, the awe. He raises his hand. The crowd goes silent, and then he speaks, delivering the ancient Urbi et Orbi blessing to the city and to the world. But while the blessing is holy, the reactions are human. Some cheer, some cry, some wonder. Who is this man? And what kind of pope will he be? Because behind the robes, the rituals, and the roaring crowds, one truth always remains. No one really knows what kind of leader a pope will become until he begins. And while this might feel like the end of the story, it's only the beginning of the next chapter. Because now, the world turns toward the next major moment, the papal inauguration. And what happens there might surprise even the faithful. The white smoke may signal the choice. The balcony may introduce the man, but it's the papal inauguration that seals his place in history. And it's not just a ceremony. It's a global event, watched by millions, attended by presidents, and layered with traditions that span both empires and eternity. But here's what most people don't know. The Pope isn't crowned anymore. For over 1,000 years, newly elected popes were crowned with a triple-tiered tiara, a symbol of spiritual, earthly, and divine authority. But in 1978, Pope John Paul I rejected the crown, choosing instead a simple mass. That rejection became the new norm. Today, the inauguration is a mass, grand, solemn, and symbolic, but without the crown. Because for the modern papacy, power is not worn. It is shown through service. The ritual begins in the open air, under the vast sky of St. Peter's Square. The new pope is led to the altar, not on a throne, but on foot, and takes his place before a sea of pilgrims, priests, and politicians. Next, two symbols are presented. First, the pallium, a woolen band draped over his shoulders, signifying his role as shepherd of the church. It's made from lamb's wool, blessed and woven by hand, and placed on him with quiet reverence. Then comes the ring of the fisherman, the very emblem that was destroyed just days ago. But this one is new, freshly cast. Its image depicts Saint Peter casting his net, symbolizing the church's mission to spread the gospel. The ring is placed on his finger, completing the visual transformation from cardinal to pontiff. But beyond the symbols, beyond the pageantry, one moment steals the world's attention. As the Mass concludes, the new pope turns toward the crowd. He raises his hand one more time, not in command, but in blessing. And with that silent gesture, the final chapter of the transition closes. The seat is no longer vacant, but this isn't just about rituals and robes. The world now watches his every word, every move, every policy, because from this moment forward, every step he takes will shape the future of the church. Will he be a reformer, or a traditionalist, a peacemaker, or a disruptor? No one knows yet, but the stage is set, and the world is watching. For most, the death of a pope is the end of an era. But inside the Vatican, it's just the beginning of something far more mysterious. From the silence of the death chamber to the roar of the inauguration, the process is a masterclass in continuity. A ritual that somehow blends divine reverence with earthly politics, secrecy with spectacle, tradition with transformation. It's a process few understand, but all are affected by. Because the man chosen in that locked room doesn't just lead a church. He becomes the face of faith for over 1 billion people, the spiritual compass for world leaders. He's a living link to a tradition older than most countries on earth. And yet, behind the robes, behind the blessing, behind the balcony moment, he is still just a man handed a legacy and an impossible task to guide a fractured world, preserve eternal truths, and answer to a higher power. But what kind of pope will he be? That is the question history is still waiting to answer. Because the real weight of the papacy doesn't begin with white smoke. It begins the moment the crowds go home, the cameras turn off, and the world starts listening. Thanks for watching. If you found this story fascinating, there's so much more behind the scenes of the Vatican that most people have never heard. Subscribe for more untold stories, forgotten rituals, and deeper dives into power, faith, and mystery.